Welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming. My name is Binyamin Kamenetsky, and it's a pleasure to be hosting this for the third year. With really, SD does everything. It's really a highlight of our summer to have one of my favorite campers of all time, Rabbi Umori Rav Rosner. I was his counselor in Moresha, and even at the time he was Rabbi Umori. So just by way of introduction. I had this class, my son gave a shir this Shabbos in shul, and he spoke about like whether or not the Isser of Talmud Torah on Tisha B'Av is the same or different than the Isser of Talmud Torah for an Avel, for Shiva. And we all know famously that it's Asr, Likro B'Torah, this is the Gemara, B'Neviyim U'Ksuvim, Lishno B'Mishnah B'Talmud, Uba Midrash, Uba Agada on Tisha B'Av. And then it says, but you can learn from, but what's mutter to do is aval kora hu b'makom she'enu ragil likros v'shona b'makom she'enu ragil lishnos, that you're allowed to learn things that you're not usually learned. V'kara, and more famously, v'kara b'kinos b'io v'dvarim hararim she'b'yirmiyah. So it says you can learn new things, the things that you're not ragil to learn, and also, kind of the sad things like Yirmiyah and Kinos, etc. And Rashi says, why is it? What's this thing about Einu Ragil Lilmod? Like, why can't? And so so Rashi says it's because there's tsar to it, because there's pain when you have to figure out something new. It's tsar. So there's again going to very like in 30 seconds. So the point is here is it's like a machlokes, of course, whether it's the same or different. The Tosfos says that based on a Yerushalmi that it's the same Isser between of the same Isser, or kind of the same source of the Isser of Avelus and Tisha B'Av and Avelus during Shiva, because of Kudei Hashem Yisharm Misamchei Leiv, that Torah is supposed to make you happy. But the Meiri says a little differently, and the Meiri says, he quotes one that says it's two different dinim. It's a din of like, by Avelus, it's not a din of sadness or of tsar, of not being happy. It's a din of anekdom, that a Avel, when they're sitting Shiva Nebuch for a relative, is supposed to be silent. That you're kind of, that's from the pasuk in Yecheskel, that it's a really din in silence. And the nafkamina would maybe be like, can you think about Torah during, so if it's a din in silence, then it shouldn't be a problem. If it's a din in happiness or of tsar, it should be. So just wanted to say, like, so the Meiri says, so it might be different. And so therefore also a Avel wouldn't have the heterim of being able to learn Yirmiyah and etc., because it's not a din of tsar, but it's a din of silence. And if you're going to talk out Torah, it doesn't matter if it's sad Torah or happy Torah. Why am I talking about this? Because, Baruch Hashem, based on this event 3 years ago, I've been doing the Yerushalmi Daf Yomi. And before I started, thanks to Rabbi Shwed and Rav Rosner, and sometimes I cheat with Rav Resnick, but don't tell Rav Rosner, there's probably, anytime I had to look at a Yerushalmi, there was probably no better definition of tsar than having to do a Yerushalmi, an idea of doing a Yerushalmi every day, but then Baruch Hashem for all Torah, and from Baruch Hashem for Rav Rosner, and for so many of us, he's turned the tsar of Yerushalmi into like, Kudei Hashem Yisharm Misamchei Leiv. So on behalf of all of us, I want to thank the All Torah community, and specifically Rav Rosner, for really transforming Yerushalmi from something that was like pure tsar into like mamish Kudei Hashem Yisharm Misamchei Leiv. So it's a really great covet to have you in our home once again.
Thank you, Binyamin. And thank you, Esti, for opening your home. As Binyamin says, it's all you. And when you describe to me how you have to have your grandchildren out of the house to keep it clean for the day, I totally get it. So thank you. Bershus Rabbi Genek, thank you for coming. And Rabbi Glasser, I have to thank Usher and Rina for taking care of setting this all up. Imagine you were told you have to live in a zoo. Now, I grew up not that far away in Muncie. We used to come to a zoo called Van Salm Park. Does it still exist? And the animals were old back when I was visiting. So we used to come, and you visit the cages, and imagine you're told you're going to have to move in to one of these cages. Nothing dangerous, not the lions, not the tigers. You could pick the monkeys, the giraffes, wherever you're comfortable. But no showering, you live in the mud, you're not going to have regular meals. How long would it take before you're like, I can't stand it, get me out of here, just get me out of here? We're in the middle of the 9 days. Rabbi Aaron Cutler, who I believe last time you said was your brother's sandik, explains and says that the thoughts that we have to have during the times of the Yemei HaMetzarim is that we don't even understand, in a certain sense, what was going on in the times of the Beis HaMikdash, the spiritual levels in Ruchnius, the spiritual levels that Ben Adam Lachaveru, people had with each other. That we think we live in a generation and we are only able to understand the small world that we live in. We don't recognize, in a certain sense, we're living as if we're in a zoo and we don't even realize that we're living that way. So I was thinking to myself, we have to think about Geula also. And what better way to think about Geula when you have someone like Rav Rosner, who has Binyamin just shared with us. He's giving Shir on Yerushalmi. He's expanding our horizons, taking something that was painful for people to learn and making it geschmack, giving it such flavor. Rav Rosner gives shiurim on Navi. Who gives such beautiful shiurim on Nach? If you want to learn the Prakim in Yeshayahu and Yirmiyahu that were an Eicha that we're learning now, come to the All Parsha app, OU Torah. You have beautiful shiurim from Rav Rosner. That's thinking about Geula, expanding our horizons, specifically with Limud HaTorah. Before I introduce Rav Rosner, I just want to thank all the people that make All Torah happen, the people that have joined the All Amudei Torah Society. Thank you very much. We cannot do it without you. If you have any interest in being involved in making sure Rabbi Rosner's shiurim are taking place and everything else, please see me. You can speak to Rina, but we really, really appreciate it. I want to thank people who've traveled. We have a fellow here who just made a Siyum Hashas, who traveled from Toronto to meet Rabbi Rosner for the first time after learning with him online for 7.5 years. And we have people like this literally around the world, but the people who are far away didn't actually come. We actually had, it's worth mentioning, that we made a Siyum on Zroyim Yerushalmi in Yerushalayim, and there were probably 150 people there live. The Kamenetskis it was a week before their wedding, so they excused themselves for participating. There was someone there who, when I walked in, he says, Shalom Aleichem, tells me his name. He says, I just flew in from South Africa. I'm a Talmud of Rabbi Rosner. I never met him. I learned Bavli, Yerushalmi, and I'm going to be on the ground for less time than I'm going to be spending on the airplane. Came from South Africa to Eretz Yisrael just to celebrate his learning with Rabbi Rosner. I also want to recognize and thank Rabbi Glasser for coming. He is a shul rabbi, so he has many things going on besides get tuned into his kinos Sunday morning. I really should give a plug to the OU's Tisha B'Av programming. OU.org, Rina, you put it together. OU.org/Tisha B'Av. Wonderful Tisha B'Av programming. So thank you for coming. And everybody, we should all be zeicha to be able to have this next year in Yerushalayim, Yer HaKodesh, and Rav Yameinu, Rav Rosner. Before Rabbi Rosner begins, I just want to say that Rabbi Rosner has his Sfarim available in the back. Over there are many, the latest sefer is a Birchon. Rabbi Rosner wrote a pirush from his shiurim on benching. So that's available in the back. Anybody that pre-registered and signed up to get a sefer, the Sfarim are in the back as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much for posting. There's a few achsanyas here. There's OU Torah is an achsanya, the Kamenetsky family are achsanyas. And just to note, last year I stood here at my father's shloshim, and I spoke about my father and everything that I learned from him. But maybe tonight I'll just start off something about my mother, who was just her third yahrzeit was just this past Shabbos on Rosh Chodesh Av, and but it relates to what I want to express right now. My mother was an amazing lady. She had amazing chachmas chaim. She grew up on the Lower East Side, a daughter of a rabbi, Rabbi Askolsky, who was the Rav of the Bialystoker, and her grandfather, my great-grandfather, Rabbi Yaakov Askolsky. So one of the stories that was said over after the Levaya, so I know it might have touched people, was I remember I once went with my mom to to the Biblical Zoo in Israel. And it was an amazing experience. They had psukim on the cages, and it was really a lot of fun. And as we were leaving, they had just redone it, and she had just such a great time. So when she's leaving, she turned around and she looked, and it's on top. It says the Tish Biblical Museum, because the Tish family, redid it, and fine, wonderful. So at that time, it was before my parents moved to Israel, before Hurricane Sandy, whatever years that it was. And she told me that when she got home, she took out the phone book, remember those big fat phone books, and she looked up Mrs. Tish's phone number in Manhattan because she wanted to say thank you. So she looked it up. She found there's like 10 numbers for Tish Corporation, Mrs. Tish. And my mother called her and left a message. She got an answering machine. So she left a message. I want to thank you. The zoo is amazing. And I just want to, so first of all, I was like, who does that? Yeah. Mrs. Tish called her back. And Mrs. Tish said, nobody has ever called me to thank me for anything besides the people that we built it for. And they spoke for a few minutes. And it's that just characterizes the values that I think she gave to all of her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. But what I want to express now is to Esti and Binyamin and to your whole family, and Baruch Hashem, I know some of the descendants that I've got to learn with also and work with this past summer in camp. But really, your house should always be a makom of Torah and of chesed and of simcha and of nachas. So we thank you again. Now it's a chazaka according to all deis. But also the all daf, all Torah, all parsha. I think we all work together to try to do what we can. Right? The pasuk's the last. It's based on a pasuk, but the last line in Pirkei Avos, in the 6th parak of Pirkei Avos. I wrote it down. Kol ma shebara Kadosh Baruch Hu balamo lo bara elo chvodo. Everything Kadosh Baruch Hu created in the world was for His kavod. So I think this tonight and every day, there's no greater celebration and kavod of Kadosh Baruch Hu than to take technology and to take what is used out there in the world for so many different things and using it for kedusha, and allowing people who travel all over the world and live all over the world to be able to learn and to share. And the biggest shiurim in Volozhin, how many talmidim were there? 200. What was the biggest? I have no idea. But it wasn't what all Torah is able to reach today, and using the powers of modernity to spread Torah and spread inspiration is really something that I feel privileged to be able to be part of, and we should be able to continue for many years. Okay, what I'd like to talk about tonight, we spoke about. Rasha was asking for different topics, obviously in Yana Diyoma, but the Gemara tells us in Shabbos, this is not on your sheet, the Gemara tells us in Shabbos, as we know, Daf Lamed Aleph, the 6 questions that we're going to be asked, and they're not really questions. The Gemara doesn't say Shoalin. The Gemara says Omrim. The video is going to be playing. We're not going to really have to answer. Versus Rabbi Ganak. Sorry. I learned in the olden days there were 2 ways to do Yeridea in yeshiva. Rabbi, what was his name? Rabbi Weiss and Rabbi Ganak. So I had the chus of doing with Rabbi Ganak, Yeridea, and the Bechinas, and it was a lot of lamdis. We had to try to do the halacha, as we could do it, but Rabbi Ganak devotes his life to one of the parts of his life to halacha and lamdis, and allowing us to benefit worldwide. So Hashem should give you a lot of koach to continue your avodas hakodesh, both in the Torah shebechsav and in the Torah shebal peh. Okay, so Shabbos Daf Lamed Aleph. So the questions that we're going to be asked, Omrim lo. So we're going to be asked, so we know the questions. Were you honest in business? Kavati tim la Torah. Asakta b'pirya v'rivya. So if you think about those, we understand where those questions come from. Because after all, they're based on mitzvos. Asakta b'pirya v'rivya. There's a mitzvah, puravu. So we know you have to be osek in puravu. Kavati tim la Torah. There's a mitzvah of Talmud Torah. And Nasata v'tata b'emuna. Right? Midvar shegar tircha. Number 4. Tzipisul Yeshua. Did you hope for the salvation? Where's that mitzvah? What mitzvah is there to hope for the salvation? And what am I lacking? What am I not fulfilling if I don't hope for salvation? Like, I'm being mevatel anything? Like, which of the 248 am I not doing? But I'm comfortable, I'm fine. We have the yeshivas, we have the restaurants, we have everything we need. Right? Again, not Baruch Hashem, but Right now, it's a little harder not to be mitzapeh Yeshua in our day. But in general, where does that come from? Says the Smak, one of the great Bali Atosfos, in source number 1. Says the Smak, it's in mitzvah part, Tzvisa Yeshua is found in mitzvah number 1. Mitzvah number 1. The mitzvah of Emunah. The mitzvah of Emunah, and the Smak, just parenthetically, somebody just asked me, I don't remember who, is like, what do you get like always talking about the people, the Rishonim and the quoting and the relationships? I don't know, I think it's just natural. The Smak is Sefer HaMitzvahs, but he has some unique countings. Some unique counting. They count certain mitzvahs that nobody else counts, that none of the other Rishonim count. Accepting tochacha is a mitzvah. That's a tough one, right? Accepting tochacha. Lakabel tochachas, and a couple of others. But here he says it's part of the mitzvah of Emunah. We have to believe just like HaKadosh Baruch Hu took us out of Mitzrayim, and he was Goelos. We believe that HaKadosh Baruch Hu will take us out of any future Galus. And he says that's Tzipisa Yeshua. Look what he says on the 5th line or so. Ve'echan ksiv mitzvazu el shma mina bezet talui shekashem sheish lanu lahamin shotzianu mitzrayim. Hashem took us out of Egypt. So too we believe he's going to take us out. And we believe that with every fiber of our being. We know imam be'emunah shlema that there is, and we're in the process, and it's going to happen. And we daven for it to happen as soon as possible, the final stage, which Hashem will get to. But that's the peace of Yeshua. So tonight, over for the next few moments, hopefully, after Me'ah Ve'esrim, we're going to stand there and we're going to be asked, Mitzapeh Yeshua, how much time did we devote? The other ones, hopefully, we devoted, all Torah, Kavatit and La Torah, but all Yeshua we don't have yet. So at least for the next few moments, we'll be able to say after 120, will you mitzapeh? Well, I went to a shir a couple of years ago, and we spent some time being mitzapeh. So that's what we're going to talk about, B'ezras Hashem, tonight. So what exactly does it entail from us to be mitzapeh Yeshua? What are we supposed to think about? What are we supposed to feel? So maybe to understand our national geula prospects and hopes, we're going to analyze the life of the symbol of geula, past and future. Right? We say every Friday night, "Tisnari me'afar kumi al yad ben Yishai." Is that a clicking have to happen? I don't know what that. Somebody's phone? I don't know. Oh, it's the door. Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, you can't turn off a door. You can turn off a phone. Okay, Al Yad ben Yishai beis Halachmi ben Yishai, and Al Yad Ish ben Partzi. David HaMelech is linked to Geula. Past, he was our first king of Malchus, Malchi Yehuda, obviously Shaul HaMelech. But in the future, we daven. We daven for Malchus beis David. So let's analyze a little bit about David's life. And hopefully that'll give us an inkling into Geula in general on the national scale. We're going to go from the individual to the national. Here we go. We have a problem. Basically, this year is a problem, 4 approaches to the problem. So the Gemara tells us in Maseches Yevamis, Daf Ayin Vav, in source number 2. We pick up the story in the middle. Right? The story took place right near Beit Shemesh, about 15, 20 minutes from where I live. Right? Goliath, David and Goliath is on one side, and he's cursing Am Yisrael, and everybody's like, what's going to be? And he's this huge guy with a lot of armor, and all of a sudden, little David HaMelech, and he's wearing Shaul's armor, and it's like falling off him, and he's small, and it can't, and what happens? He takes his slingshot, boom! Right in the spot exactly where the armor is not touching, he fells the giant. And all of a sudden, they're looking on the battlefield like, who is that? I don't know who it was. Right? He was Nechba ben Aki. He wasn't known. Says the Gemara, Amar le Doego Adomi. All of a sudden, Doego Adomi, one of the few people in history that Chazal say might have lost his Olam Haba. Baal Lashon Hara par excellence. Says Doego Adomi in source number 2. You're asking who he is? No, before you ask who he is, and they were saying, is he fit to be the king? Before you ask if he's fit to be the king, why don't you ask, is he fit to marry into the Jewish people? That's a more fundamental. Forget kingdom. What about marriage? What do you mean? Rus HaMoavi's great-great-grandmother was a Moabite. Right? Amar le Avner. Avner says, don't worry. Avner ben Ner, Ammoni v'lo Ammonis, Moavi v'lo Moavis. Don't worry, it's only the men. Ammon and Moab, the pasuk in Kiseitse, not the women. The women are good, and it's okay. So he says, Elamiata, what do you mean? What kind of drush is that? What, men, not women? What mamzer v'lo mamzeras? You're going to say all the isurei chitun in the Torah are only males, not females? That's not true. And there's this whole argument that's taking place on the battlefield. David can, David can't, David can, David can't. And finally, Doeg has a taina and nobody has an answer. There's silence. There's silence. Until towards the bottom of the piece, Amasa stands up on a chair and says, I have a Mesorah from Shmuel Hanavi. I have a Mesorah, and whoever argues with this, I'm ready to be Moser Nefesh and get rid of them. Call me Shena Shomea Halacha Zu Yidoke Becherev. Kach Mekubani Bebeis Dino Shel Shmuel Haramasi Amoni V'lo Amonis V'lo Miyov V'lo Moavis. David's okay. Whew. David's okay. He's allowed to marry in, and then he can marry. Why did HaKadosh Baruch Hu orchestrates the events behind the scenes? One would think that the king of Israel, the source and the destiny of our Geula, he would have the best yichus, the most pure. I get, as a Baruch Hashem, I've been giving shir for a couple of decades, I get a lot of calls about Talmidim. No, tell me about this guy. When he was here in your shir, did he come to shir? I mean, I get some questions that I say I'm not answering that question, and I say that why does that? Where'd the grandmother go to school? I'm like, that doesn't matter. He's a great guy. I'm like, no. Was his grandmother a Balas Tshuva, or which high school did she go to? Like, I've never gotten like what kind of tablecloths they put on. So that's a different level. But like, what is it? Yeah, his great grandmother was a Moabite, but he's a great guy. Yeah, the family was from Lot and Ammon and Moab. Yeah, but Mary, he's great. Right, what's going on here? Like, okay, we cleared up and we David's kosher. But why do we even need this? And the question builds, because it goes back even earlier. There's a number, as we know, a number of stories in the murky roots of Melech HaMashiach. You have in front of you, add 3 more stories. Right, 3 more stories. Right, we're not going to read them all inside. Source number 4. Lot and his daughters. Right? That's pretty early. Lot and his daughters. Right? This is where David HaMelech comes from. Right? Lot and his daughters. Abachira, Seira, this week's parsha, Rashi talks about it also. Right? Al Tiskar Bam, Al Tatsur. Right? Number 1, Lot and his daughters. Little later, Vayeshev, Yehuda and Tamar. Right? Number 2. Number 3. Right? Rus, Boaz. What's going on here? This is Malchus Beis David. This is the background. And there seems to be a pattern of murkiness. I say murkiness and not Isser because we could devote a shir for each of these stories. And I will say right now, each of these stories, as you have a couple of sources on the sheet, the players acted l'shem shamayim. They were l'shem shamayim. We're not suggesting that there was any negative kavanas involved. I gave you one source for each of the stories. Again, we're not going to read all the sources, but you look in source number 9, the Torah Shlema, right? Lot's daughters thought there's nobody left in the world. That's it. Right? Just like Noah, they all knew the story, Noach and his family. That's it. So why did Hashem leave us alive? It must be He wants us to propagate the world. They were l'shem shamayim. Right? I'm not going to mention it, but you can look, if you look in the Hakdama to the posthumous volume of Moshe Feinstein, he has an unusual story there about a man who was ill, who had a dream, and there were 2 old women. There was Benos Lot. Okay, not for now. But the Benos Lot were l'shem shamayim. The Ramban says in source number 10, Tamar, she had this semi-nevuah, Ruach HaKodesh, that she was supposed to be with this family. Ima Shel Malchus. Right? This is Tamar. Right? And Rus and Boaz, she was trying, Yibum, Geula. So in each of the stories, we're not focusing on, we're not blaming, we're not saying something wrong was done, but there's definitely a pattern here of why did Hashem orchestrate that this is the background of Malchus Beis David? That's our question. 3 or 4 answers. 3 or 4. The fourth one, obviously, is the one that we're going to use for our purposes tonight. Number 1, first idea. There's a Gemara Maseches Yuma, source number 12. Yuma Daf Chav Beis. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel. Mipnei ma lo nimshacha malchus beishol. There are a couple of Gemaras, but this one says, why did Shaul's malchus not last? Lo nimshacha malchus beishol. Mipnei shelo haya ba shum tofi. We would translate that as, he had no skeletons in the closet. He had nothing to hide that held him down to realize humble beginnings. Meaning what? Da'amar Rabbi Yochanan, Mishra by Yotzadak, Ein ma'amidim parnas alat tzibur el im kain kupa shel shratzim tuliya lo me'achorav. The best leaders are the ones that literally have a knapsack of impure insects on their back. Kupa shel shratzim. Shim tazuach daito. If you think you're so great, check what's in your knapsack. Check what's behind you. So says the Gemara, that's why Shaul HaMelech's malchus didn't last, because he had perfect ichus. He came from great stock, right? And Kish, and says the Gemara, there's an element of a leader being able to stay humble, recognizing who he was. The Chizkuni says that's what made Moshe Rabbeinu limited, so to speak, and how Moshe Rabbeinu was Anava. Moshe Rabbeinu's parents was a relationship that later became Asur Daraisa, Gili Arayas. Right? Moshe Rabbeinu's parents, I went around this morning in camp. I tried to go around and ask trivia questions. So this morning's trivia question was, and they said, they asked that last year by Rosner. Okay. But I'm glad they remembered it. Hi, I am Moshe's grandfather and great-grandfather, but I'm the same person. I love trivia. Moshe's grandfather, great-grandfather. Who am I? I'm Moshe's grandfather and great-grandfather, but I'm the same person. Who am I? Levi, because Moshe's mother was Yocheved, who was a daughter of Levi, and Moshe's father was Amram, son of Kahas, son of Levi. So Levi was Moshe's grandfather and great-grandfather. But what does that mean? Moshe's parents was an aunt and a nephew. That's an Issa Daraisa. An uncle can marry a niece, but an aunt can't marry a nephew. So says the Chizkuni, source number 13. That's exactly the message, why Moshe Rabbeinu was a great leader. Because he had this Kuba Shel Shratzim. He had this behind, which kind of held him in check. The Ran says in one of his drushes in source number 14, this explains why, again, the same idea, why a melech who has very elastic power and authority always has to have a Sefer Torah with him. Right? Every Jew, we have a mitzvah to write a Sefer Torah. And I was just speaking last night to someone who says, yep, Bizman Hazeh, many poskim say, right, publishing Svarim and sponsoring Svarim, that's the key in today. But either way, says the Ran, but a melech always has to have a Sefer Torah with him. He goes out to war, he goes out to lunch, he goes to political meetings. Why does he have to have a Sefer Torah with him? He's a Jew like every other Jew, says the Ran. Lefi shekoach hamelech gadol, because a melech's authority is flexible and elastic, einenu meshubad lemishpatei Torah kamo hashofet. He could take my backyard. He could take my car. Ve'im lo yeshalem beyiras elokav. If he won't be perfect and complete, yavo lahafriz alamidos yoser. He might go above and beyond. He has the Torah. Right? Yeah, you're holding a Sefer Torah. You're holding a Sefer Torah, that's going to keep you in check. Message number 1. Why was David HaMelech a successful malchus in contrast to Shaul HaMelech, according to Chazal? Because Dafka. It kept David HaMelech, What does David HaMelech say in Tehillim? Ani tolas v'lo ish. Right? David HaMelech is, you read some Sukkim and Navi, his humility is unbelievable. Moshe is the Ana Mikal Adam. David's up there too. Right? You can't build a Beis HaMikdash, only your son. Awesome! I'm so excited. He thought he was going to build the Beis HaMikdash. The Navi even told him he was going to build the Beis HaMikdash. And the Navi came back and said, you hate to imagine, this is the Beis HaMikdash. Imagine you tell somebody they're davening Musaf on Rosh Hashanah. And you got to be the gabbai that's going to tell him, sorry, plans changed. That's not a comfortable conversation. I have one of my gabbaim from Beit Shemesh here with me. It's not comfortable. You could build the Beis HaMikdash. Oh, sorry, you can't. Not an ounce of negativity. What Hashem wants, amazing. Message number 1, he has that background, kind of keeps him in check. Number 2, second idea, which is a fascinating idea, It's one line in the Shem Mishmuel, but it's explained. I saw this many years ago. It was in that Sefer Zichron Harav. Remember that Sefer Zichron Harav? Zichron Harav, Kavod Harav. I don't remember what it was. They put out for the Rav's birthday. Anyway, from Rav Chaim Yaakov Goldach, he explains this one line of the Shem Mishmuel in source number 15. The Shem Mishmuel says, again, these approaches are not going to answer all of the events and the stories, but at least some of them. Each approach will touch on some of them. Says the Shem Mishmuel, David HaMelech needed a little Moabite blood in him. Wow. Why? Let's read the words. The Shem Mishmuel quoting from his grandfather, the Kutzker. Second line, 15. The Inyan Malucha lo hayanimsa b'Yisrael. To be a king is not something natural. A king means you have to rule over fellow citizens. That's not something naturally Jewish. We are ki'ish echad b'lev echad. Right? There's a Yerushalmi. It used to be that you could just go to Yerushalmi and we had to trust you because we have no idea. So now it's a Zohar. Now it's already. Maybe they'll be all Zohar one day. But I don't know. But it used to be. Now people are Yerushalmi, so you can't use that. It's a Piskei Zuta. Okay, anyway. So it says, Inyan HaMalucha, Lo Yanimsa Yisrael. There's a Yerushalmi that says, like every Jew, when you bang with a hammer on your right hand, your left hand doesn't get angry at your right hand because you banged the nail, because you're one. You're just upset because you're in pain. So to be a king is not something natural for a purebred Jew. The Inyan Malucha lo hayanimsa b'Yisrael vayutzrichin likach zos me'amon u'moav. Whoa. Says the Kutzker, and explains here by the Rav Goldvicht. Ki kasher kol Yisrael ki shechad heima eno shayach she'echad yistarer achavera. One person is going to rule over their fellow Jew. Kamo she'ena aver ha'echad she'ba'adam yistarer lo aver acher. That's why, says the Shem Mishmuel, according to the Kutzker, that's why David HaMelech needed a little Moabite blood in him so he could be a successful ruler, to rule over. That's what Malchus Beis David. And that it's not a dream. Like when we wish our kids, we want our kids to be Balei Chesed, Talmidei Chachamim. We don't wish them to be the king. Like that's Dafka. It's not like something that we wish. We need somebody, right? That's so David HaMelech, and he has to be totally Lishma. Ulachein hutzruchu Yisrael litol ha'melucha me'amon u'moav. Because they have a little gayus, they have a little confidence in them. Because the natural state of a Jew, as the Gemara says in Yavamis, remember, Rachmanim Baishanim Gomlei Chasadim. Right, that's our DNA. And David HaMelech even saw, remember the nation, the Givonim, they didn't have this in their DNA, and he knew they weren't like us. Because to be a successful king, you need to take a little bit of that to rule over, because it's not something natural. This even helps explain a question that's asked by the Rishonim. The Sefer Ikarim is source 17, Rabbi Yosef Albo, one of the underused, underappreciated, right? Out of there are many, but the big four, Sefer Ikarim, the Mor Nevuchim, the Kuzari, and the Chovas HaLevavos, the Sefer Ikarim is great. I don't know why you say he's easy, he's deep, but we should use it more. Sefer Ikarim asks, based on the Chazal, why is it that Shaul HaMelech sinned and David HaMelech sinned? Right? They weren't members of the no sin club, like the Gemara writes in two places. But they both sinned. So why did Shaul lose the Malchus because of his sins? And David HaMelech didn't lose the Malchus for his sins. Whatever David HaMelech's sins were, which the Gemara says, Eino Elachote, but he did something. Counted the people and Batsheva. So what's the difference? Says the Sefer HaIkarim. What type of sin was it? We all sin. We all have personal sins. David HaMelech's sins were personal. Okay, so Hashem punished him for it, and zeo. Shaul's sins had to do with being a melech. So those sins were national, had national repercussions. Why? Because what were Shaul's sins? Remember, Shaul, two major sins. Right? Amalek was the second one. But let's take Amalek. Remember the Haftorah for Parsha Zachar, which is the answer to another trivia question that we had this year. The only time ever you can learn the same Haftorah 2 weeks in a row. The only time you say in the Torah, Sefer Torah 2 weeks in a row, if it's a Purim Mishulish. So Shushan Purim is on Shabbos. What's the Haftorah for Shushan Purim? In Yerushalayim, the Maftir is Vayovo Amalek. What's the Haftorah for Purim? There's no Haftorah for Purim. There's a Haftorah for Purim if Purim is Shulish, when Shushan Purim is in. So it's the same Haftorah, Parsha Zachar. So they lane the same Haftorah 2 weeks in a row. Parsha Zachar and Purim is Shulish. But what does it say in there? Remember, Shaul HaMelech is there, and Shmuel comes to him and says, wipe out Amalek. And Shmuel comes and says, how are you? And what does Shaul say? Baruch Hashem, hey, kamti, what a Baruch. I was Mekayim. And what does Shmuel say? Sarcasm in the Tanakh and onomatopoeia. Umeh kol atzon asher baznai. I hear some sheep. And what does Shaul say? Oh yeah, the Am wanted to give karbanos. And what does Shmuel say? Hashem wants you to listen to him more than any karbanos. And then what does Shmuel say? Again, the Am made me do it. And Shmuel says, you're the king. I'm just paraphrasing the psukim. And Shmuel turns to leave, right? And Shaul grabs his cloak and tears it. If you look in this story and the previous story, I think, by when he didn't wait a week for Shmuel to come, because Shaul, he might have been a tzaddik for the first half of his life before the Ruach Ra, but he wasn't a successful king because he didn't rule over. He was always worried about what the Am is going to think and what the Am is going to feel. And David HaMelech, he ruled over the Am. There's a beautiful, I don't think I gave it to you, I was looking before, but yeah, it's between 17 and 18, if you can imagine. But you could write it on, or you could write it in your notes. But there's an amazing, remember the story of when David HaMelech brings the Aron back to Yerushalayim, and he's dancing, and the Rambam quotes these psukim at the end of Hilchos Lulav about Simcha, and he's dancing, and he's sweating, and after an amazing day bringing the Aron back to Yerushalayim, he goes home, he takes off his jacket, he falls onto the couch. What did the psukim say? Remember? The psukim say that Michal, Bas Shaul, was looking out the window and watching this whole event. Bas Shaul, we don't know that she's the daughter of Shaul, but Michal Bas Shaul goes, and when he walks in, Michal says, what an amazing day that all the maidservants of the nation saw the arms of the king of Israel. Right? Basically saying, like, what are you doing? You're embarrassing yourself. It's very straight. And then David answers, I'm the king, not your father. That's the conversation. Right? So the Yalkut on the pasuk fills in. Yeah, your father would have cared a lot about what everybody else was thinking, but I do what Hashem wants me to do. And that's why I'm the king. Because his sins were personal and not related to the Malchus. But he had part of that because of his blood. Because of Moab, Ammon and Moab. That's message number 2. So why does David HaMelech need it? Number 1, Kuba Shel Shratzim, keeps him honest. Number 2, the idea of having Moabite blood, because it's not natural to be a king. Number 3, which might be the beginning of number 4, our final approach. It might be the separate one. There is an idea suggested by the Beis Yosef in his Sefer the Magen Mesharim on Chumash. It's quoted here by the Ema Van Smecha, source number 18. The Ema Van Smecha, many of you I'm sure are familiar with the Sefer, written by a Hasidic Rav, 1944. We found it afterwards, and unbelievable about Israel, about Eretz Yisrael and Yishuv Eretz Yisrael. So here he's talking about the context of how is it that the beginning of the Shiva Sion, right, in the 20s and the 30s, how is it that so many people that were so distant from Torah and from mitzvos took part in the process? That's his issue that he's dealing with. So he writes, and he quotes this from, again, the Magen Mesharim, I think it's in the Kedushas Levi also, the following Kabbalistic idea, where he says, Mavur be'sifrei ha'makubalim, shebe'esh Hashem yisbarach rotzeh la'asos ezer davar gadol ba'olam, when Hashem wants to bring something amazing to the world, shenogea le'elyonim b'shmei hashemayim lo tachtonim, that's going to affect the cosmos, that's going to affect the whole universe, because there's a midas hadin out there that Hashem created, he has to kind of like get it into the world under the rug, to try to sneak it into the world so that the prosecuting forces who would say, oh, we don't deserve it, Hashem has to kind of like sneak it in and garb it with unseemly coverings so that it could come to the world. Again, a Kabbalistic idea. Let's see. So he says, Ma'atef, Hashem Yisparach Ma'atef Davar Zeh B'Kama Mini Itufim, on the second line in 18, It's small. I recognize that. V'afilu be'emsam she'enam noim, even if it's not pleasant. V'odim kurim, they're ugly coverings. Kidesha lo yargishu bazeh hadinim hamakatrikim, so that the prosecuting forces don't say anything. And he relates that the matana Eretz Yisrael, the first thing Rosh Hashanah says in all of Shas Bavli, right? 3 matanas that were given to Am Yisrael: Olam Haba Torah and Eretz Yisrael, right? It's a matana. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so he says, coming back to the Jewish people, coming back after 2,000 years, Hashem had to clothe it with unseemly garb. Okay, we're not getting into that right now, but for our purposes, he quotes this from the Magen Mesharm, the Rabbi Yosef Cairo, about David HaMelech. That's why David HaMelech had to come from all of these stories. Yehuda and Tamar, Lod and his daughters, Rus and Boaz, all a little fishy, a little tricky. Again, each one of them can be explained, but because of this, to bring it into the world. What does this mean? What does this mean for us? How can we take a message from this Kabbalistic idea? So either this is behind it or it's a separate idea. It says Rav Soloveitchik, source 19. Just parenthetically, I never met, when I came to MTA, the Rav was already ill, so I never was Zocha, but all of my Rabbeim are Talmidei. I'm a Klisheni. I remember I once I wrote a foreword for one of the Sfarim that were put out about the Rav about Thanksgiving and blessing. I remember which one of the Sfarim. They asked me to write, so I wrote an article called "The Rav I Never Knew." So how I used the Rav every Shabbos, Shuvah, Shabbos, I call everything, but I never met him. So I started off with a story that when we were still in Woodmere before we made Aliyah, our daughter is now 27, 28, so probably about 24 years ago. So there was something called a phone line, like a house phone, right? So I remember the phone, my phone rang, and my 4-year-old daughter answered the phone. Hello? Hi, is the Rav home? So I hear my daughter say, the Rav's on the wall, but my father's home. So that put me in my place. And I'm like, thank you, Abigail. Thank you. Can I have the phone, please? Okay, but anyway, so Rav Soloveitchik in source 19 tells us there's a common theme. There's a common theme in all these stories, in all the background stories. All the stories represent darkness and a seemingly hopeless situation. And a situation where you could just give up. And maybe any normal thinking person would just give up. Lod and his daughters. We're done. The whole world is destroyed. Right? Tamar. Forget it. Right? 1 son, 2 sons. Yehuda's forgotten. I'm done. This Ruach HaKodesh that I had, maybe I'm wrong. Rus, all the stories are about darkness, but it's about players who didn't take darkness at its value. I'm not giving up. I could dream of a better tomorrow. And I'm going to act to bring that better tomorrow. That's the basis for Malchus Beis David. That's what we need as the basis. Again, he quotes a pair of, I'm just reading a couple of sentences. A pair of vulgar, unwitting young girls, the daughters of Lod, the source of power to begin everything anew. They believed that the whole world had been destroyed, and it was up to them to recreate it. Sure, they did it in a horrible way, but their primitive intention was good and demonstrated a remarkable strength of spirit. That same spirit is a foundation of the kingdom of the house of David. David HaMelech's Malchus were built on these stories of hope in darkness. He quotes, right? Right after we bury somebody, what's the first thing a Jew does? We turn around and we say a Kaddish that talks about Tchias HaMesim. Because that's what a Jew does. Right, and he says on the next line, another naive and simple woman, Tamar, showed the strength of waiting and hoping, of having faith, even when she became the subject of mockery. V'chulu, waits patiently under the most horrible circumstances. The basis of Geula is the hope for Geula. And the taking into ourselves the action to bring the Geula. That's what Malchus Beis David is based on. All these stories are dark, hopeless situations where there's yearning, believing, and hope for a better tomorrow. And we see this idea as well in another context. If you think about it, in all three of these contexts, it was women, right? It was Benos Lot, Tamar, and Rus. There is a tour. The tour in source number 20 quotes the idea, the Shulchan Aruch quotes a minhag about certain malachas not being done on Rosh Chodesh, but the tour quotes from his brother that the Chagim are connected the three avos. Right? Pesach Shavuos Sukkos, Pesach is Avraham, Lushi Vasi Ugos, Yitzchak is Shavuos, and Yaakov is Sukkos. And then he quotes that the Roshei Chodesh, the 12 Roshei Chodesh are connected the Shvatim, but by Chet Egel we blew it, so it was taken away from us, and it was given to their wives. And this is the idea of Rosh Chodesh being the yontif of the women. Right, that's what the Torah says, the end of source 20. They didn't contribute by Techeta Egel, the women, and therefore we give them Rosh Chodesh. Ma inyan Rosh Chodesh eitzel Cheta Egel. Right, what do those two things have to do with each other? So if you think back a little earlier, the Gemara tells us in Maseches Sota that the men, when Paro made the Gzeira of throwing the boys into the Yaor, the men just wanted to give up, right? The Gemara says Amram divorced his wife and all the men that followed. So the men basically gave up. No more kids. And the women said no. No, the women said no. We have to continue. You're worse than Paro. Right? Miriam was already 4 years old, right? Prophesizing. Right? She was 6 when Moshe was born, so she was prophesizing before that. So what happens? They go out to the fields and they beautify themselves. They look in the mirrors together. Right? That's the original selfie, right? The Gemara says that they looked into the mirror together, like that's mamish the pose, and they were excited about, right? So they did that, and then they have kids, and throughout from those nashim tzidkanios, right? B'schus nashim tzidkanios, we nigalu Yisrael mitzrayim, right? That's the Gemara in Sota. You have it there in source 22. All the way till Cheta Egel. Why didn't the women give to the Cheta Egel? Because they said, don't worry, Moshe's going to come. They kept the optimism. They kept the feeling of hope in a situation of darkness, in Mitzrayim, at Cheta Egel, throughout. What's Rosh Chodesh? Miriam brought the tupim u'macholos to Kriyas Yamsuf. What's Rosh Chodesh? You look outside on Rosh Chodesh, you don't see anything. It's dark. Little sliver. Little bit getting bigger. Rosh Chodesh is darkness, but you know it's getting bigger. You know it's coming. You know the light is going to be shining. Rosh Chodesh is the perfect schar for the optimism and the not giving up that the women showed in the desert. Geula, the basis of Geula, is the yearning and the hoping towards Geula, for Geula, and the actualizing and trying to bring it, and doing what we can to be part of it. And that's why this had to be the basis of the Malchus based David. Number 1, Kupa Shel Shratzim, so it keeps him honest. Number 2 was he needs a little Moabite blood in him, at least explaining that story. Number 3, Hashem has to garb great matanis, with unseemly cloth. Right? And number 4, or maybe behind number 3, is that Malchus based David, Geula is predicated on the hoping for Geula and the trying to do what we can. We've been yearning for 2,000 years. Animam ve'emuna shalema. Over the past couple of years, I think we've been yearning a little deeper, a little more intensely. Because that's what a Jew does. Right? October 7th was a dark and tragic and terrible Chil Hashem. It could have meant the end. That's what they were planning. Right? They wanted to go across. They thought that Hezbollah would join them and everybody would join the party. But they had plans. They found plans. They were going to get to Hebron, get to Beersheba. But that didn't happen. We siyata d'shmaya. We stood up, brushed ourselves off, and said, there's darkness, but we dream of a better tomorrow. And we're going to do what we can to bring. And the greatest Chil Hashem since the Holocaust turned into the greatest Kiddush Hashem since the Holocaust. Of Am Yisrael standing up in their lands. Because that's what a Jew does. We stand up and we go forward. And we dream that it's going to be better. The Kleiserberger Rebbe, lost a wife and 11 children. He gives shot in a pasuk. Ki hu amar vayehi hu tziva vayamod. Ki hu amar vayehi. Vayehi, the Medrash says, ein vayehi ela lashon tsar. This is not on your sheets anymore. Tsar. Vayehi b'me'achashverosh, vayehi b'moshvor shoftim. Vayehi is lashon tsar. Ki hu amar, Hashem says vayehi, there's going to be tsar. Hu tziva, but Hashem's command, vayamod, get up and go. And you can move forward after the vayehi, with the pain. We gather strength and we dream of a better tomorrow. That's what we've been doing for thousands of years. That's what we've been doing for 5,785 years. Adam Arishon suffered the greatest tragedy in the history of the world, arguably. Maybe not arguably. Right? What happens? Remember the story? So Hashem gives out a punishment to everybody. Isha gets a punishment, and Adam gets a punishment, and the Nachash gets a punishment, and then HaKadosh Baruch Hu, exits stage left, and we're left with Adam and Chava. And Adam turns to Chava and says, what would we expect? Great job, honey. There's never been such a tragic spousal error in the history of the world up until now. What does Adam say to Chava? Adam says she was Isha. Adam turns to Isha and says, I'm going to name you Chava because you are Aim Kol Chai. Adam's able to keep it in perspective and say, we have a world to build. And I'm thinking of tomorrow. And what's the next pasuk? Kadosh Baruch Hu gives them kasnos or. Hashem says, if you could look beyond, I could also look beyond. So for a long time, we've been thinking about it. This is what we do. We see darkness and we dream of a better tomorrow. Rabbi Lamb has an unbelievable article. And anything of Rabbi Lamb's is gold. I had discussed when I was in the Kol Elyon, so every Thursday we had lunch with Rabbi Lamb, and for a couple of years he did this, and a special guest. Different guests from different rabbis, philanthropists. So anyway, so Rabbi Lamb writes, he has one article where he says, the three that cried. Where he talks about three women that we talk about on Rosh Hashanah. Three women. Aim Sisra, Hagar, and Rachel. In Haftarah, Rachel Mavaka. Rabbi Lamb said they all cried, but it was three different cries. It says, Aim Sisra, right? She's looking out her window, right? And she's all of a sudden, and she's like, where's my bubala? Where's my sister-in-law? And her friends are saying, no, don't worry. He's getting spoils. He's getting women. Don't worry about it. And all of a sudden, as the sun starts setting, she realizes the truth. Aim Sisra couldn't deal with reality. So she made up her own reality. And as Rabbi Lamb says, if you live in a dream world, you have to be prepared for nightmares. And she made up her own reality. That was it. He wasn't coming back. It was clear. She didn't believe it. That's one reaction. That's one kind of cry. And then you have the other kind of cry, Hagar. Hagar sees reality. I have no food. My son's going to die, my baby. And what does she do? She's consumed by the reality. She throws away her baby. I can't deal with it. I see it so clearly. Done. Neither of those are how a Jew cries. Rabbi Lamb says, Rachel mavakal baneh. Rachel sees the reality for what it is and asks, how am I going to do? I'm going to start crying out to God. And I'm not going to stop. And one of the keynotes, we say, Rachel's the one. She sees reality. She's not consumed by it. She goes forward. Who amar vayehi. In the first year, all the dates get all mixed up. But so we had two sons and a son-in-law that were in battle most of the war. Now we have added a son-in-law, Baruch Hashem, and I have another son starting in about 2 weeks. But they were in one of my second son he was a mefaked, he was a commander, an officer, but the other two were miluim, my son and son-in-law. I'm not going to get into the whole story, but One of them, my Avraham, we didn't have contact with him for 75 days. No contact, zero. I always told my wife, no news is good news. Good news. That was from the beginning, like the second week. They were all in San Chanim, the paratroopers. So the other ones that were Miluim, so they had a phone every here and there. But we had no contact with. One time we saw there was a Yisrael Hayom article about their unit, and I saw a picture of him in the. But so we had no contact, and some stories that we're not going to get into now. We lost, but I remember I told my wife I tried not to leave the country that first few months because I want to be there. My wife and I actually had tickets to go to. We've never really gone away. Like a night here, night there. We like finally planned. It was like 5 years ago for our 25th anniversary. We're going to go to Switzerland. We got tickets for October 8th. October 8th. That was our ticket, so we didn't go. But anyway, but I planned to do scholars in residence. I was flying to America for 48 hours. I do that a couple times a year. So I was flying to America. I remember it was Parshas Vayigash that December to West Hempstead. And I told my wife, I said, I bet he's going to get after Shabbos. I said, I bet, whatever. This is from October 15th or so when he went in. Sure, there was talk about there was a WhatsApp group of the parents. Maybe they're going to get an. So Wednesday night, we wake up Thursday morning. I was flying Thursday night, and I was coming back Sunday. I didn't want to cancel if I was able to. Anyway, Thursday morning, we wake up and we see on the news, they said, 101 is getting out. Oh my gosh. I'm sitting at the Beis Medrash that morning. I was still in Kerem B'Yavin at the time. I get a phone call, unknown number. Hello, Abba? I'm like, oh, Avram. I run outside. I'm like, Avram, I'm flying tonight. Is there any way, if I would be able to see him, and he was going back Monday Shabbos, I would miss him on the other end. I said, is there any way that I could come see you today? They were keeping them in for at least 24 hours. They hadn't changed their socks in 3 months. They hadn't taken a shower. They haven't, and just dealing with other before they were going to go back. So I said, ask your commanders. Anyway, so if he calls me back a little bit later, yeah, you could come down. So I drove down to the south, and I sat with him in the parking lot for an hour. So why do I remember that this was Parshas Vayigash? I was Parshas Vayigash because on my way down, I'm thinking that this is the parsha that Yaakov Avinu sees Yosef for the first time after 22 years, and they give each other a hug, and he says he cried on his shoulders, and only says once, right? Why? Because Yaakov was saying Kriya Shema, and all the lumdis about Kriya Shema. Why wasn't Yosef saying Kriya Shema? Osek b'mitzvah, Osek mitzvah, and this. It was the last moment of the Zma. What? On the car down there, I realized that there's no stira between saying Kriya Shema and giving your son a hug after not seeing him for a long time. The feelings are overflowing emotion for HaKadosh Baruch Hu and love for your son. There's no stira. There's no stira. Anyway, so I got down there. I'm sitting there for an hour with him. You'll see why I'm bringing this in here. And that is, so we're talking. So he said, I said, Abba, one of the hardest things is that I don't have time to mourn. He lost a good friend on October 7th. Good friend, Joey Gedalia. Yosef Gedalia played basketball with him and was a good friend of his. And then a month and a half, 2 months later, he lost one of his chayalim, one of his soldiers, Binyamin Erli, was killed when he was there. And that was the only other time we had any contact with him. We didn't. About a minute before we found out that Motzi Shabbos, I got a WhatsApp from a friend of his. Avram's okay. And then a minute later, we found out that. But so he says, I don't have time. We're busy fighting. I don't have time to mourn. He said, but you know what, Abba? I realized that, Yosef, my friend Yosef and Binyamin, Rachel Mavachal Baneh. I don't have time right now, but Rachel will cry for her Yosef and Binyamin. I'm like, I'm supposed to be the rabbi. But he said, and these are our precious soldiers. I have to continue fighting. I can't. That's geula. Rav Nevitzal has an unbelievable comment in one of his svarim. He says that on Shabbos, we have this not unusual, we're used to it. Shabbos afternoon, we lane the first aliyah of the next week's parsha. Isn't that funny? Like, why are we laning next week's parsha? Next week will be next week. Let's review Shvi. Why do we lane next week's parsha for? What, to get us like in the mood? Because Rav Nevitzal said, a Jew always knows there's next week's parsha. Whatever this parsha is, there's next week's parsha. And that's what we always look for. and we feel that we're almost there. Jewish history has been on fast forward. Like we were talking before, some people meet me and said, Rabbi Rosner, could you speak a little faster? Maybe go to 1.5. So what could I do? I try my best. But we feel that Jewish history, we feel like we're mamish always there. We just have to open up our eyes. Right? I think a few Mefarshim say, every morning we say 2 brachas. We say more. We say Pokeach Ivrim, and we say Hamaver Sheina Me'enai. What's the difference between those two? They're both about opening up your eyes. Pokeach Ivrim, Hamaver Sheina Me'enai, Sumay Afabai. No. Pokeach Ivrim is physically opening up our eyes. Hamaver Sheina, let me see and appreciate what's going on around me. Let me appreciate, not just see, but see. Right? Even in English. Now I see it. Now I see it. Right? No, now you appreciate it. Do we appreciate the unbelievable times that we're zocha to live in right now? There's been pain and suffering, but there's been unbelievable nisim and flows, and chas v'shalom, like the Gemara says about Chizkiyahu, chas v'shalom for us not to say shira, for the miracles that we have witnessed on October 7th and after, and since, not just the daily existence of the state of Israel with billions of people surrounding it that don't want it to exist. But I don't know which stage. I remember by Shabbos HaGadol, we have this book at home with I forgot what it's called, but it's about Masi Pur Shalanu. I think that's what it's called. It has one page for every year since 1948. And it has the headlines, on that one page, pictures. So I said, what are you going to put on this year? Or I should ask, what's not going to make it? What's not going to make it? You think about 75% of the missiles getting shot down would have been miraculous. 75%, 99%? Sinwar, Hania, what's his name? Nasrallah. The beepers were this mamish, Makas Bechoros, you'll die, you won't die, it's unbelievable. What story, what part of the year what's not going to make it on the page? I mean, we're writing as there are those Rabbanim that have said, we're writing books of Tanakh that have not existed in thousands of years. I was on a few weeks ago. I was on a Zoom with Anglo Rabbanim from Israel with Rav Rimon. So Rav Rimon said it was during the Iran, which turned out to be 12 days, whatever. So he says, it's mamish like Purim, but it's not like Purim. It's like Purim. Number one, it's like Purim. It's Persia. Number two, there's one man that wants lahashvid laharag la'abed es kol ha'yehudim minar v'adzagin tafanashim yom echad. Number two. Number three, he said, I didn't understand. I will be finished in 2 minutes. I didn't understand until last Thursday night. It says, what's with Russia and Ukraine? Why? What? That's so much effort and money and time. What's with them? They want to get some extra land, for 2 years. What's with Russia and Ukraine that they're so? He says, Thursday night I understood it. Why I understood it? He says, in the Purim story, HaKadosh Baruch Hu was getting all the pieces in place before there was even a story. Right? Getting Achashverosh to build his throne, and the Gemara says he had to move to Shushan because that's what the throne was too big, and Esther and Vashti, before the whole story started, he got everything into place. He said, why with Siyata D'Shmaya was the Israeli Air Force and we were able to do what we did that Thursday night? Because none of the friends of Iran were available. Now, Hezbollah, I remember my son-in-law told me, you think before they went into, he says, you think Hamas, Hezbollah is they said they found in one warehouse in Lebanon more weaponry than they found in the whole Gaza Strip. Understand? And that was last summer. Where's Hezbollah? Where's Syria? Why are we able to fly straight through Syria if you look on a map? Saving thousands and thousands of kilometers, you refueling above Syria. on their way to Iran. Syria's not around, Hezbollah's not around, and Russia has its hands stuck in Ukraine. Now I understand. Mamash the Purim story. Kadosh Baruch Hu was Mesabev Sibos before it. But then if Ramon finished, it's better than the Purim story. Why? Remember the Gemara says 3 reasons why we don't say Hal on Purim. Number 1, Nes Chutz La'aretz. This is a Nes Eretz Yisrael. This is a Nes about our land. What's the third answer? Akadi Avdei Achashverosh Anan? We're not Avdei Achashverosh. We're not. We're in our own land. We're defending ourselves. So do we appreciate the Maver Shena Me'enai? But you know what we have to do over the next few hours, the next few days? We're almost at the finish line. We just got to push a little more. We just got to push a little more. Kadosh Baruch Hu, we're mitzapeh. We're mitzapeh. We know you could bring that last stage. Malchus Beis David is based on darkness and hope through the darkness. And focusing and knowing. We know it's going to happen. Kadosh Baruch Hu promised. We know it's going to happen. We don't know exactly when, but we know and we feel. And we're living in unbelievable times. It's challenging. There are challenges, and there are personal challenges, national challenges. There's a lot. But we're zocha. We're zocha to live in this dar. We're zocha to take part in helping HaKadosh Baruch Hu bring the geula. Look at everyone in who's on the what's called in the oref or the chazit, right? On the battlefield or behind supporting. You know, we're all in this. There is darkness. There is still darkness, and we're davening for HaKadosh Baruch Hu to take away the darkness that is left, because there's also so much light. There's also so much light. You hear so that HaKadosh Baruch Hu allows us. We're on the 1 yard line. We just got to get one more. Please, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, allow us to be able to celebrate with the Kamenetskis next year in Yerushalayim, to be able to be proud, and to, as the Psukim say, we're not going to talk about Yetzias Mitzrayim anymore, right? We're going to talk about the miracles that we're zocha to now and the miracles that we will be zocha to. B'ez Hashem, we should be zocha to be able to share much Torah together. Just when Mashiach comes, we're still going to have all daf and all parsha. It's okay. B'ez Hashem, that's not going to change. But he's not going to get off the hook. But the B'ez Hashem, we should be zocha to Yeshuos and Nachamos b'meherav Yameinu.
Amen. Thank you, Rabbi Rosner. Everybody will be in person, Bezras Hashem, with Rabbi Rosner. Just for scheduling, Ma'ariv will be right now. Following Ma'ariv, there's dessert, fruit, and ice cream available in the kitchen. Once again, thank you, everybody, for coming and participating. And thank you again for the Kamenetskis for opening their home.